Welcome to Wireless LAN Weekly, a podcast focused on the wireless networking professional. We aim to educate, inform, entertain, and inspire. Get ready to listen and enjoy. Now to our host of the show, Keith Parsons.
Welcome. This is Keith Parsons, and you're listening to Wireless LAN Weekly. This is episode 26. In this episode, we'll be doing a little bit of a book review over Scalable Voice over IP, Mobility, Integration, and Deployment. Nice long title for a book by Joe Epstein. We'll be talking about that, but in the short term, we'd like to do a little maintenance here, and we'll talk about the podcast itself. If you go to the wirelesslandprofessionals.com website, over on the right side is a little envelope letter-looking thing, kind of orange-colored, and it says, "Are you on the list?" We would like to invite you to click on that button and join the mailing list for this podcast. We'll be sending out at least monthly and probably bi-weekly new white papers. And if you'd like to be on the mailing list to receive those, just click on there. This is run by MailChimp, is the service provider we have. It's a double opt-in, so you click, you get an email back, and you say, yes, we really do want to join this. But if you like the podcast and you'd like to hear more from us, please click on that little list. Thank you very much. And now on with the episode show today. Today we're talking with Joe Epstein, and I feel pretty glad that I was able to spend an hour or so on the phone discussing his book and discussing Wi-Fi in general. A couple months ago, I was on a panel discussion at Interop, and Joe was one of the other featured speakers, so it's good to have him on the podcast with us. Well, I'm sitting here looking in my studio at the bookshelf on the wall, and there's about almost five full bookshelves with nothing but wireless LAN books. Probably close to 100 books on wireless LANs. If there's a book out there on wireless LANs, I've probably bought it and read it, trying to get as much information as I could about wireless LANs. It's an ongoing industry, and some are 10-year-old books, and they still have some value. But today we're talking about a book by Joe Epstein, and someone had told me the title of the book and said, you ought to read this book, and that title is really long. Scalable Voice over IP, Mobility, Integration, and Deployment. Wow, that's a mouthful. But when I heard Joe was the one who wrote the book and heard of his work and heard him talk in the past, a brilliant guy, really understands the protocol, I thought, yeah, I might want to give that book a read. So I did. Having taught for the last, many years now, voice over Wi-Fi, how to design voice over Wi-Fi, how to analyze voice over Wi-Fi. It's a pretty tough subject. You have to cover a lot of things. You have to have a knowledge before you can get into designing for voice over IP, over Wi-Fi. You have to understand all the networking components. Access layer, distribution layer, core, switches, hubs, routers. You have to understand networking protocols, TCP, UDP, IP, MAC layer, etc. You also have to understand voice and how voice used to be analog, how the PSTN network, public switch telephone network, was working, how you had COs on the edge, central offices going to customer premise equipment, CPE equipment, how all those little things went together. In addition, you had to understand how voice over IP works. Currently on a wired network, voice over IP, things like the codecs you choose and MOS scores, R values, jitter, latency, and all the little nerd knobs you can use to adjust and tweak voice over IP. And then on top of the voice over IP, we are now adding all of the wireless LAN fundamentals. Things like contention domains, RF characteristics, the 802.11 protocol itself, the entire protocol with all its pieces, how the roaming works. And also you have to understand security, authentication, encryption, where those happen, and how they have handoffs. And then, if you understand all of those things, then you can talk about and design voice over Wi-Fi. I was so pleased when I got a hold of Joe's book because it covers all of those items, from the standard voice, old POTS as we called it, plain old telephone service on a PSTN network, through voice over IP. He does a great job of talking about 802.11, how 802.11 itself works, how the protocol works, how contention windows work, how the protocol actually does its stuff. I've taught hundreds and hundreds of people CWNA. I've read lots of CWNA level books, and this is one of the better books on the description of how those pieces work. So today we have Joe with us, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the items in his book, kind of how he wrote it, why he wrote it. But I just wanted to preface the tech section today with my recommendation coming directly from me. That I think it's a great book. It's a great read. You ought to have it on your shelf. I personally have my copy in Kindle format, and it resides on my iPad, so I can have it with me as a technical resource wherever I go. Well, done with the preface little part. Let's get on with the show. On to the tech section with Joseph Epstein of Meru Networks talking about scalable voice over IP.
Things every wireless LAN professional needs to know. Gear up, buckle down, and stand by for the real techie stuff.
This is supposed to be where I interview Joe Epstein, but because of a mistake on my own fault, I was using a recorder and mixer, etc. In fact, just a little side note here. In my recording studio, I have a little netbook connected to Skype, and it's dedicated to nothing but Skype. Coming out of the output of the netbook, the sound out goes into a compressor limiter gate, which cleans up the sound a little bit, and then goes into a mixer. Coming out of the mixer is something called a mix minus, where all of the signals in the mixer, except for the Skype, are sent back to the Skype via the microphone on there, so people on Skype don't hear themselves with a little echo. And then all of the whole mixer board comes into a cable that gets plugged into my digital recorder. The mistake was mine alone, and I had connected up the digital recorder and had plugged into the mic port rather than into the line in port. And so the recording of Joe Epstein's, and it was a great interview, by the way, was a not acceptable level of quality for what we would like to have on this podcast, so I'm apologizing right here. We will have Joe Epstein back again, but I recommend you go out and get his book and read it. It's a fantastic book. So sorry for the lack of podcast interview today. There is a lot on the show notes if you want to go and read there. And thank you, and we'll be back with you next Wednesday for the episode 27 of Wireless LAN Weekly. This is Keith Parsons, your host. Again, apologizing for the lack of the Joe Epstein interview. Thanks, and we'll see you next week.
Wireless LAN Weekly, a podcast focused on the needs of wireless LAN professionals. We look forward to your feedback. Please leave your comments at the bottom of the show notes, or email feedback on the show can be sent to feedback@wirelesslanprofessionals.com. If you'd like to leave a voicemail feedback, just call 24/7 and leave a message at 1-801-481-9018. Until next time, this has been another production of wirelesslanprofessionals.com, a place to educate, inform, entertain, and inspire.